Salam, everyone. Welcome to the Samovar Network and our discussion titled Afghanistan Bleeds. My name is Reza. I'm filling in for Omar as moderator slash panelist today. I'm a medical student in Hanover, New Hampshire, formerly a Kaplan MCAT instructor, and I've worked for a few nonprofits and done a little community organizing in my time. So to introduce the panel and then also introduce what the discussion is about today, almost 150 people have died due to several bombing attacks in Kabul and in Herat over the course of the past 2 weeks. And that's something that has affected the Afghan community, both in Afghanistan and in the diaspora, greatly. And that's why we wanted to have our discussion today. So to get straight to the panelists, Soraya is an anti-war activist in Canada. Could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, Reza. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on. Yes, I live in Toronto. I've been a long-time organizer in the anti-war movement. I'm currently working with the Mosaic Institute to conduct anti-oppression workshops with youth and educators. I'm also an anti-racist organizer, and as of late, been doing a lot of mobilizing around Islamophobia.
Thank you so much. Lema, next up on the panel, is an Afghan-American expat currently living in Afghanistan. Could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, Reza. I worked as a civil society coordinator for the Aga Khan Foundation in Kabul, and now I'm a USAID project manager here, working on a women's empowerment program.
Thank you. And then Ali is a journalist currently working in Afghanistan. Could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working in Afghanistan since 2011, basically. I've been covering it off and on since about 2007. I've also followed Afghan refugees in Greece and Turkey over the last few years.
Thanks so much. So the very first question that I have for all the panelists is, how have your friends and family in Afghanistan been affected by these attacks? What have been their reactions? But also, does this occurring during Ramadan influence those reactions? So whoever wants to go first, speak up.
Okay. I think people are sad and tired of what's happening here. I think it shows through the protests. I think a lot of people have been affected by it. There's always someone who knows someone that was either killed or injured. I think me and Ali have a relative who their brother was killed during this attack. I have a friend who worked for the Roshan Telecom company who dozens of his employees and colleagues were actually killed and badly injured. So this was one of those attacks that really hit close to home. And the morale I feel here right now is pretty low. Like there's just a disenfranchisement of, or not, there's just a disappointing feeling of the government, of who's protecting Afghans. I even know people who are wanting to leave the country right now. People's chowkidars and house guards and house workers are trying to leave the country because they just don't see it getting better here. And I mean, the fact that 3 events happen in a row is really startling for people. And as much as we think that people are used to this, it doesn't get easier because people wake up in the morning and don't expect this to happen. They expect it to be a regular day. In terms of Ramadan, I think for the past couple years, there's always been attacks during Ramadan, and it's not something new. And I can't, unfortunately, it's to be expected here. Like, Islam has nothing to do with this, because if it did, then they wouldn't have the attacks during this time.
That's a good point. You mentioned that a lot of house guards would, and other folks are thinking about moving out. Is that feeling of wanting to leave Afghanistan prevalent only amongst a specific class of Afghans or a specific subset of Afghans?
That I don't know. I think these people have been thinking about leaving for a while, and sometimes there are events that happen that are catalysts to pushing them out. It's a lack of economic opportunity. It's a lack of stability. When people see that they don't have a future here, whether it's related to economic stability or even just security in general, they want to leave. And it also depends on many different classes want to leave. The higher class want to leave, and usually the higher class has access to leaving, and they have multiple passports. And it's probably like, when I say class, I mean people with a certain bracket of income. I don't mean anything else. And then when it has to do with people who are in poverty, they usually make misinformed decisions, right? So they'll go towards Iran, and they'll go get smuggled or something like that, not knowing what the after effects will be. So I can't speak to say that it's one certain subset of class or bracket. It's everyone who feels uncomfortable.
Okay.
Right. It's not just one sort of, I think what Lema's point is that it shows like more wealthy people, they're already out, or they're already in the process of being out because they have access to get visas, to be smuggled, things like that. But when you see people who traditionally, who don't make very much money, who don't necessarily have the connections to figure out how to get out, talking about it, I think that's what she's pointing to. Because obviously the wealthier, more connected people, and you'll always have, for instance, like people, I've interview people in the government who say like, oh, well, I stayed and I'm serving my country, so why can't other people do the same thing? But what they forget is the privilege that they have in being able to ride in armored cars, having access to these different types of people, possibly being paid in US dollars, access to going abroad, in terms of their employment and access to visas and things like that. So I think, again, she's speaking to, there's certain classes of people that have been always talking about it, and a lot of them, it's a very real possibility in one way or another. Even if they go into debt to do it, they still have a possible chance of going. But to see people who, don't have the financial means and probably not the connections to get out, talking about getting out, I think that makes a difference in terms of like the overall psyche, or it says something about the overall psyche.
So it's about degree and not just about like dichotomous, this class is thinking this class is thinking that.
Right, everyone is thinking about it, but not everyone can do it. Yeah. Right?
That makes sense. Soraya, you wanted to say something, I think.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add on to Laima and Ali's point. I think this is, in a broader context, part of the dehumanization of the Afghan people, and how our struggles are seen as less important, less as just less in total, and we have to push back against this. I think the Afghan diaspora needs to come together and fight against this false notion that these are economic migrants. These are war refugees. We saw what happened in Kabul. And the reason why it did get some media coverage, I feel, and then I think a lot of Afghans felt this way, is because it happened in such close proximity to so many embassies, where a lot of Westerners were affected in it, and we really need to push back against that very racist notion and start focusing on migrant justice. And that's something there's been a lot of talk about that here in Toronto, and working with organizations like No One Is Illegal, and talking about how we can change this narrative around Afghans who are fleeing the country. And really talking about the different kind of privileges, as Ali was mentioning earlier, that are involved with the different groups of people who can and can't leave.
Just to go back to that point about the embassies, Soraya is right. A lot of the media coverage did. I mean, there was one media organization that even made a map, and it was so interesting because like most of what they showed on the map were the embassies So it was talking about, like, there were headlines like close to the German embassy, close to the US embassy. The British and the US embassy are pretty far away from that roundabout where it occurred. And even the German embassy, to get into it, you have to pass through these security checkpoints. And first comes the Indian embassy, which interestingly didn't make it on people's maps. And it's also ironic because Germany is one of the main EU countries that is deporting Afghan refugees, saying, yeah, it's 5 checkpoints, like Lema said. It's 5 checkpoints you have to get through to get to the German embassy. And Germany is one of those main EU countries that continues to deport Afghan refugees, claiming that there are safe areas of the country. And there was the latest UN civilian casualty report said that in the first 4 months of 2017, the highest number of any kind of attacks was on the province of Kabul. Which is a big deal because, again, if you think anywhere in the country should be safe, then it should be the capital. And that's proven. And when they say the province of Kabul, most of those are in the city itself. So that's proven that if even the capital itself, you know, forget Herat, Mazar, Jalalabad, Kandahar, and these other major cities, if Kabul itself is not safe, and this is how many attacks that we've seen like this in Kabul since 2015, each one you think sort of raises the bar to sort of like the next, like, it can't get worse than this, or I can't believe that something like this would happen. And it just keeps, unfortunately, getting bigger and worse in the capital.
Going back to something that you said, Soraya, about the diaspora and organizing, what have you seen to be the reaction from the diaspora where you're at in response to these attacks?
It's actually, okay, so there's a number of things that are going on here. One is the urgency of having the community come together to have a moment of healing and talking about these things and being able to show our grief and to show our solidarity and support and love for one another. And the other is immediately following that with action and remembering that a lot of this is political and that we do need to talk about this. We do need to change the situation, and obviously there's not much we can do here being in the diaspora, but we can at least support our counterparts who are on the forefront in Afghanistan, in Kabul, who are struggling to change, to fight for justice and against oppression. And we saw that the people in Kabul are at their last resort. We saw what happened after with what they did, unfortunately, with I'm not going to go into the graphic details, with the last suicide bomber, and it's, I think it's a matter of really, and we need to, these are important discussions we need to have, and I don't think we should shy away from talking about the politics of it all. One word or two words that I hear being used often is unity and division. And if we're going to talk about being united, we have to be very clear about what we're standing in united for. Are we standing united for state power? Are we standing united for the liberation of the people, for the oppressed, for the marginalized, for the most vulnerable members of society? I think we should look at it as working our way from the bottom up, not up down, not from the top down.
So the next thing that I wanted to ask, if you can dive into just a little bit more detail about how the diaspora is unifying, or if not unifying, how are those divisions cropping up?
I can't speak for the other Afghan communities elsewhere, but in Toronto, what we're seeing is not just solidarity within the Afghan community, but with other marginalized communities. At the last vigil, we had a group of, well, there was a protest going on the same time, the same area, and we were sharing space with an Indigenous chief who was protesting and on a hunger strike against missing and murdered Indigenous women, missing and murdered Indigenous men, suicides, and the harassment that they have to deal with on reserves, and the inhumane living condition that they have to live in, and state brutality and police brutality against their community. And so we had them in remembrance, and we actually had a group of Indigenous women come out from their tent and perform a ceremony for us in remembrance of the victims of in Kabul. And so I think it's important to remember that we can tie in these struggles together. We should stand together in this struggle for our liberation, for the oppressed and for the marginalized. And likewise, they invited us to come join them in their camp, and we didn't just stand with other Afghans. We stood with our indigenous brothers and sisters who were also and their struggles. And a lot of it, there's a lot of parallels and similarities. I mean, we have to, especially on the subject of colonization that has impacted both our communities, of imperialism that has impacted both of our communities. And so there's a lot that we can that we can share and support each other on. And so I think that was very important for Afghans to see as well, that that we're not alone on this. And so when they saw that act of solidarity from the Indigenous community, and we had another member of the Muslim community who was not Afghan, who organizes around Islamophobia, also speak. And it's a reminder that our struggles are one, and that we need to help each other, because we're against a much bigger, larger problem here. And so it's important for us to stand united. And again, to reiterate what I said before, when we use the word unity, we have to be very clear. We have to have a very clear vision of what we are standing united for. So yeah, one of the things that I've seen that is very different than what I've seen previously in previous years is solidarity between Afghans and other communities.
Really quickly, going back to like what can the diaspora do, I think it comes down to two things. One is to inform yourself about the country. So beyond just, watching what's on the news, and I may get in trouble for saying this, but avoid most of those Afghan American TV shows because they have no idea what they're saying. Avoid, but more than that, like really try and understand, like, what does it mean that someone is from Herat and that they don't feel like in the city they feel like there's not as much in terms of attacks and things like that, or what does it mean that there's so many attacks in Kabul? Really get to know, because if you're going to fight for something, you should know what you're fighting for, right? And hopefully, and it obviously, because it's your own country, you have more of a connection to it anyways. And then the other thing is I mean, obviously the US is the biggest power player in Afghanistan, right? Like, they decide whatever happens there, and however you want to phrase that. So now is the time more than ever probably for Afghanistan in the United States, and also in Canada, which plays a huge role, and in Germany and France and all these other countries, to really sort of demand answers from their governments. Like, what are you doing there? What have you solved? Whether you want the foreign involvement to continue or not, there definitely still should be this question of, okay, what are you doing? How are you making it more safe? Why is it that the president, the chief executive, and all these other politicians, the one thing they all agree on is that Pakistan, Iran, and Russia are helping the Taliban, but nothing is really being done to them, right? And that's something that you can demand of politicians in the United States, and maybe they won't listen, but at least you're putting that voice out there. So I think that's, and Lema obviously knows a lot more about that kind of stuff than I do. But I would say definitely, like put that pressure and ask them, okay, if you're going to stay, then how long are you going to stay, and what are you going to do? And if you're going to leave, when are you going to leave, and what is your plan for after you leave?
Just to piggyback on what both Soraya and Ali are saying, I think this comes down to community organizing among the Afghan diaspora. And because the US is one of the biggest players in Afghanistan, it's really important that, you know, Afghan Americans have a unifying message, whatever that be, whether it's safety in Afghanistan, whether it's stability, whether it's economic empowerment, whether it's creating businesses. It's a matter of lobbying. And we have an established system in the US that other minority groups use, and they've been really successful. We have the, you know, the Pakistani community, we have the Israeli community, we have the Chinese community, the Indian community, and they have a really strong lobbying party. And that's why they have decent relationships on a different on different levels, whether it's being brothers with Israel, or having good economic cooperation with China, or if it's, you know, A, B, and C. We have the opportunity to do that, but we have to make sure that the messaging is right, that we're together on this. And I think what happens is that many people in the diaspora just get really confused. Going back to what Ali said, inform yourself, understand what's really happening, and that can be really difficult. So find journalists that you trust, find news outlets that you trust. I actually have to read 10 different news agencies on one topic or one event that happens in Afghanistan, because you have so many opinions and so many personalities talking and giving what their opinion is, and you just have to get 5% of it that is actual truth. And then you'll kind of understand the dynamic by watching how things unfold. So, I mean, I think topics need to be a unifying message of a topic, whether it's security in Afghanistan, like I said before, or economic development, and lobby for that. And I think coming from a government background and coming from a community organizing background, I've seen that when you have an established organization, knowing that you have 10,000 people behind you, 50,000 people behind you, we probably in the US have about, what, 300 to 500,000 Afghans? I don't know the exact number, but that in itself is a voting bloc in the US, right? So you could use it to your advantage if there's strength in it, if they know people are contributing and giving funding and so on. So it's all possible. It's a matter of working together.
And for me, as someone who isn't as educated about what is happening on the ground in Afghanistan as you three are, if I were to want to figure out what's going on after an attack like this, who are some of those journalists that I should go to? Who are, what are some of those agencies, news agencies, that I should be reading in my little digest? If anybody wants to give names.
Just kidding, no. I mean, yeah, there's definitely, okay, so there's obviously like all of the mainstream media outlets, so like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the AP, Reuters, the AFP, all of those sorts of like legit big names that we already know. And then in terms of like local media, you know, there's Tolo, which is like the biggest media outlet, Pajwak. Those are the two biggest ones. But I think part of it is like making an, obviously if you make an informed decision about politics or whatever in the United States, hopefully you're reading many different sources, right? Or you're watching many different sources. NPR does some coverage of Afghanistan from time to time. Al Jazeera does. RFE, Radio Free Europe, does a lot. Deutsche Welle in Germany. The Independent, the Telegraph, they do it. The BBC, obviously. So there definitely is a lot of sources out there. And I think it's like any other topic. You just kind of got to mix all of it together and somehow hopefully arrive at your own truth, your own understanding of the truth.
And with that, I'd also like to add on that it's important for us to encourage each other to also think critically and to read more, just in general, and read more social political thoughts on these subjects and compare to struggles of other peoples elsewhere. And also, in terms of going back to what Lema was saying about community organizing, one thing I can't stress enough is to empower ourselves. I see a strong lack of confidence with a lot of youth. They just feel they don't know enough, or they're not experienced enough, or they may not have the right tools or resources or the capacity. And to give a quote I read somewhere, you don't have to see the entire staircase. You just have to take the first step. So I think empowerment is very key here as well in terms of community organizing and putting aside our egos and pride and focusing on working together on a very clear vision. And when that's established, remembering to tie it in with those who are on the forefront in Afghanistan and making those connections as well, because that, from what I'm hearing from my comrades who are in Afghanistan, is they want to work with the Afghan diaspora. They want that feedback. And so again, to please remember those who are doing good work and organizing in the country as well, and to reaching out to them and asking them what we can do to support and help them.
And so for me, being on the outside looking in, and thank you guys so much for listing all of those. That's a huge resource that we're going to share with everybody else who's viewing right now. For me, I've seen a lot of online response. I'm all the way in New Hampshire. There aren't very many Afghans around me. And so a lot of the online responses have been vigils. There have been GoFundMes that have been created. I was wondering if, from your perspectives, the response from these attacks, or the response to these attacks, is it any different to the response from the quote-unquote mother of all bombs that occurred some time ago? And if there is a difference, what is it, and why do you think that exists? Please go ahead.
Yes, there's a difference. There's a difference in two ways. One, it's that, I mean, if you look at sort of the way the quote-unquote mother of all bombs was, I mean, someone online said something like the U.S. has dropped thousands of bombs in Afghanistan since 2001, and this was the first one to get its own press release. And it really was in that way. And all of the conversation leading up to the bombing was about this massive, powerful, expensive bomb and all of the damage it could do. And me and Lema were together when we heard about it. And we were both so angry and freaked out that, like, what does this mean? What happened? And I went the next day to try and go to the site, and I didn't get into the site, but we got close. And then I went about a week later, and we still got not to the actual site. But the difference is that the mother of all bombs became sort of like a bragging right for the U.S., especially for Trump, you know, because he's like, it's been a massive success, and we're very happy. And even the government very quickly said that there were no civilian casualties. With that, though, the thing about that is maybe there were none, but we won't really know, because as far as I know, media has still not been allowed there. You know, on the first 2 days after it happened, me and my friends from international and local media, all Afghan, tried to go in, and we weren't allowed in. Then I went back about a week later with an Afghan Canadian filmmaker. We didn't get into the site either. We got closer, but not to the site. And as far as I know, no one has gone to the actual site yet. So it's one of those things where it's like, it just came and it went. In terms of the reaction to this bombing, there was obviously anger, because it was in the middle of the city at a time when everyone was going to work and going to school. And it was very much about, maybe not so much in the foreign media, but definitely in Afghan media, about the civilian casualties, because it's the kind of casualties you can see, right? So 150 people were martyred and more than 300 were injured. But what that means in reality is probably more than 1,000 people were affected, because entire families are affected when one person is martyred or injured. And I think the mother of all bombs was something that came and went. And I think for like journalists, it's still something interesting, because we still want to know what happened. But this bombing, it, like I said, so many times we since 2015, there have been these events that we thought this is the worst. And this is again proving that, unfortunately, I don't know what the bottom is, but apparently it hasn't been reached.
So what I'm hearing is that this is different from the Moab in terms of the spread, the reach of the attack. Whereas the Moab is interesting in terms of what happened, and we still don't know. This is more effective or affecting, because thousands of people are affected by their loved ones being martyred or being injured.
Right, and then like with the mother of all bombs, they had the excuse of saying, "Oh well, it targeted Daesh," and so that again is a bragging right for the Afghan government and the U.S. government, because they say it's a blow against Daesh in Afghanistan, which in itself is like a questionable phenomenon.
The difference I see, in addition to what Ali was saying, is also the rhetoric around both events. With the MOAB, it was an extension of the occupation and a sign of the jingoistic, militarized culture and societies that we live in, and from a lot of right-wing patriotic Americans, I saw a lot of people who were for it, seeing it as a sign and power, a demonstration of Trump's military power and might in the U.S. and the U.S. military, of course, and they were very all gung ho about it, and that was scary to me. But with the Kabul attacks, again, it's the same group of people. They use it to they exploit it really to further Islamophobic rhetoric about how savage and barbaric we are and how much of a threat Islam is. So those are two very clear-cut differences I see in terms of the conversations that are had around both, at least here in the West.
Really quickly, going back to Sarayo's point about the reaction to the Moab, there's plenty of jingoism in Afghanistan, right? There's plenty of support of, if you want to call it the foreign intervention, the foreign occupation, however you want to refer to it. There's for various reasons, there's plenty of support of it, and there's plenty of excuses made for it. There are people in Afghanistan who will use the term collateral, Afghans who have lived here their entire life, who will use the term collateral damage. And so, unfortunately, that jingoism isn't relegated just to outside the country.
And that jingoism isn't relegated just to, non-Afghans outside the country or Afghans in Afghanistan.
Right.
From what I've been seeing amongst the diaspora here and friends back home in California, there are Afghans out there who also believe in the words collateral damage when it comes to foreign intervention or foreign occupation. And so with these divisions that exist, Lema, where do you believe and where do you see on the ground yourself these attacks coming from, right? Because there's the Afghanistan that people see in the news, the Afghanistan that a lot of my non-Afghan friends see is monolithic. And all they see is either suffering or criminals. And it's a lot more complicated than that, just based off of what we were talking about, Soraya and Ali were talking about. So where do you think these attacks are coming from? And to the best of your knowledge.
The best of my knowledge, I am not involved in government affairs, so I have no idea what's happening at the top level in terms of security of the nation. However, from just my observations, I'd have to say the situation here is really complex because there's so many different regional internal factors and people who are involved. And I'm talking about externally, internally. It's not only the internal issues between many different Afghans because of 40 years of war and trying to gain power and resources, but it's also the regional players, our neighbors, Western powers and influence who are fighting a proxy war with each other. And what happens is that Afghan lives don't matter. This is all just it goes back to the 1800s with the Great Games. Nothing has really changed. And all of these, factions of groups, rogue factions, different internal political parties and external political parties, movements, and external funding that come from different countries all play a part. And in terms of a system, it's this instability and I think Ali may have a better, point of view than me because he is a journalist and has tons of sources. But like the lack of strength that we have in leadership in the country, with our national defense, our local police, our disunited government, our political leadership, the weakness overall. You know, economic instability plays a role. People get paid to be part of the Taliban. We have economic talibs that just need to get food on their plates, and they're part of it. So I think, you know, in Afghanistan, it has so many resources. It has poppies, opium money, intelligence for other countries, minerals, precious stones, and gas. And it's, you can see that there's different countries involved in Afghanistan's affairs that kind of like subtly are involved in managing these things in different regions, and without saying anything in particular. So because of that, Afghanistan is just a place with many people fighting each other regionally, but also internally, because they're also involved. And so I can't say what exactly is happening without my mind just exploding.
And see, that's the thing, right? Like, the reason why I asked that question is because the mainstream media, the Ali mentioned, they're harping a lot, or they're speaking a lot about ISIS being in Afghanistan. And that's, for them, the way that they're presenting the news, that is the main threat and the main reason that these attacks have happened. But you're presenting a more complex picture. And that it's...
Sorry. I think ISIS is an organization. I think that they are being... And if we had access to see who is funding who, ISIS is just another name for the Taliban. And then there's a faction on top of ISIS. That's a rogue faction. There's Haqqani Network. And then under them, the Haqqani Network, there are rogue factions. And then under the Taliban, Taliban is just a name. There's someone from Badakhshan that's part of the Taliban, but has a different agenda than the Helmandi Taliban. So it's not monolithic at all.
And that's what we like to hear on the Samovar Network, that it's not monolithic. You can't paint with broad strokes. And so for Afghans living in Afghanistan, I think one of the biggest questions that diaspora folks like me who don't have very many connections over there is, what does all of this complexity mean for them?
It means they're being killed.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means. It means they're being killed for different people's interests, like what Lema was saying about sort of like regional politics. I mean, obviously, since the Taliban became an armed opposition movement or a terrorist movement, or whatever term you want to use, and other groups, we have always been saying that they are armed, aided, and abetted by Pakistan, and now Russia, and now Iran, and also Russia. And this is the thing that, you know, the government is always calling for. You know, they're always saying, like, why are we not being very clear that Pakistan and these other countries, but most of the focus has been on Pakistan, are aiding and abetting these groups. And if you look at what happened in the immediate aftermath of the attack in Kabul, of the Chorai-Zambak attack, is that the government said that it was the Haqqani Network, but that they were directly guided and influenced by the ISI, by the Pakistani intelligence agencies. And you know, this is a huge claim. I mean, imagine if well, I mean, no one would care if like Syria and Lebanon were fighting, but if you know, imagine if another country said that, you know, their neighbor was actively, you know, planning attacks on their soil. And if they said, you know, like the UN made a comment, I think the UN had like a moment of silence or something, and like Paris put out the Eiffel Tower lights. Well, guess what? Paris is a major world power. You know, they could say like, okay, we want to investigate these claims against, it may be hard to investigate against Iran and Russia, but it's not difficult to investigate against Pakistan in the sense that they're allies, right? It is difficult in the sense that it has a very deep state and all of these sorts of things, but in the sense of, you know, being allies and in turn and things like that, it's not that difficult to say, we keep hearing these claims, what does it mean? And that's, I mean, like I always say, we aside from maybe Lebanon, we have the worst neighbors in the world, right? Like, that's exactly the problem, is that, you know, we do, whenever the president or the chief executive or anyone else says it's an imposed war, what they mean is that there are regional and neighboring countries that are aiding and abetting these armed groups. And there have been, you know, cases of this documented. I mean, we all know that essentially Gulbuddin Hekmatyar was hiding out in Pakistan, if not right away. I mean, he was seeking medical treatment here in Turkey, right? Dostum is now in Turkey for whatever reason you want to believe. But that means that these countries can put pressure on these people, and on these groups.
You spoke a little bit about the Afghan government. I'm wondering if there's any information at all about their perspective on this, other than this is a regional proxy war and there are multiple players in Afghanistan affecting us. What can be done from the government side of things? If this is just a proxy war that's being fought on Afghan land, what can be done? What is being done by the government to rectify that, to prevent it, to stop it, etc.?
I mean, I think in that case, it's a security issue. And so there is more that can be done in terms of like training and deployment of the security forces and providing them basic things. You know, ever since, I think the first time I wrote about this was in like 2012. You know, and it dates before that, and it continues to this day. You know, Afghan soldiers complain and police complain. We don't forget like food and water. We don't even have basic ammunition and basic supplies that we need. And these are the kinds of things that the government can handle. You know, a lot of that has to do with rooting out corruption, but it also just has to do with, you know, if a soldier is martyred on the battlefield, let's say in Badakhshan, and he's from Laghman, you need to make sure that his body gets back home and his family doesn't have to fly his body. A few years ago, my friend Mujib Mashal, he wrote a really great article for Al Jazeera about, I believe the family was from Kandahar and they had to get the son's body back, and it was just this amazing, like terrible sort of like long journey that the father had to go through to get his son's body back. And so in that case, when you don't feel supported and you don't necessarily identify with this government and you feel like this government isn't doing very much for you, even in your ordinary life, how are you going to fight for them? So that's the kind of thing they can do. They can also try and be more upfront with their foreign allies, which I know is difficult because they hold all the cards, but to say things like, okay, stop deporting our people because they're not safe here. And to say like, okay, what are you really doing to, again, like Iran and Russia might be difficult to control in the sense that they're not necessarily allied with all of the sort of like NATO and EU and powers, but Pakistan is. You know, and so they're, you know, again, asking them like, what are you doing? What kinds of pressure are you putting on them? And how are you helping us? You know, you're saying training and advising, but what does that mean? And you know, well, yeah, that kind of stuff.
Just kind of going along what Ali said about our police forces, our ANSF, our national security forces. I mean, we know of people, I mean, in the army, many, this is a norm, that they don't get paid on time. Sometimes they'll go on with 3 to 4 months without pay. They don't get regular food. They don't have the right shoes. They don't have the right uniforms. And just like no ammunition, no reinforcements. Sometimes there's no communication with their captain. This is a really poor way to take care of the people that are on the front lines for their country. And these type of reasons are why I think Ali said, like, how do you expect them to fight for your country? There's even, you know, people in the police force, maybe not police force, but the ANSF who have turned, who have been, you know, internally bribed or externally bribed and have, you know, shot their own people or NATO forces or so on. When you can't take care of them and instill a sense of pride and make them your priority because they're going to make Afghans their priority, then how do you expect them? How? And then I've even heard that, you know, when they die, you know, when they become martyrs defending their country, not only, they don't even get a proper burial. Like their body is not sent back home. There's no one to pay for it. And so these are all things that I think that the Afghan government can play a more stronger role in doing, taking care of them first.
And Soraya, I actually wanted to ask you from your perspective as an Afghan Canadian, if any of these details are surprising at all, or if this is stuff that the diaspora community in that region already knows.
No, it's not surprising. I think everyone already knows, and it has been mentioned at the event we hold here in Toronto from the MOAB rally to the Kabul attack vigils, is the complicity of neighboring countries, particularly Pakistan, and that the role that they play in their foreign policy in Afghanistan's politics and Afghanistan's affairs. That's something that I hear a lot here. And so and I think a lot of Afghans share that sentiment and resentment. And would also agree with Ali's point about pressuring, these other major superpowers and to, being more transparent about the role that they play in Afghanistan's ongoing instability. So, yeah, this is not something that's new at all.
So we've spoken a little bit about Afghan police force individuals who returned. They don't feel dedicated to the government because the government, in their eyes, hasn't given them anything. Army, and we've spoken a little bit about how there are folks in Afghanistan who want to leave because of these attacks, who've always wanted to leave, but now that conversation is reaching into communities who don't necessarily have the context to leave or the money to leave. But I'm wondering how folks in Afghanistan feel about the government and the job that the government is doing, the job that the government has done, and whether or not they feel a sense of something deeper than disappointment, right? Something like let down by their government, if that exists within that within the Afghan community in Afghanistan.
I think that whenever there is a security issue like these explosions, it just proves to people more and more that they're hopeless, they're tired, they can't trust the government to secure their safety. And these are one of the reasons why people flee, right? If the government cannot avail security or the basic necessities to people, they leave. And I think it depends on which position or side or perspective that you're looking at. If you work in the government, you know how hard many people work to try to put some system in place. I think that if you're outside the government and you're just watching what's happening day-to-day life, you're unable to get a job, your family member has been hurt by this explosion or died because of it, you have no trust and you just are so again disappointed and upset of what you have. It's no different than any other country, but the one thing that I will always be surprised about is how quickly Afghans bounce back and want to make their city or their homeland better. And you always see that when after these things, these type of events happen, that people are waiting in line to give blood or to help or to give money, and even in the diaspora, how quickly did people raise money to help? So that's still inside of people in the diaspora and within Afghanistan, is that you have that need to want to make sure that your neighbors are taken care of. So whether the government's going to take care of them or not, Afghan people will take care of themselves.
I like that. That gives me hope. But I'm not the one that's important here. There was a question that was asked by Sajid or Randewal on the Facebook page. and he's asking, with all the challenges that we've got and the security issues that Afghanistan is going through, do you on the panel think that Afghanistan is going to get better? And are you hopeful about the future? And I think that's a good question for us to end on. And so if you want to expand on that, not just answer that question, but also give your closing thoughts, that would be great. And whoever wants to go first, please go. Let's go with Soraya.
I'm not on the ground, but from what I'm hearing from folks who are on the front lines there, and from what I'm seeing from my end here, I honestly think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think we need to start talking more critically, more boldly about what needs to be against state oppression, against terrorist attacks, and I think I'm just going to say it, I think we need to start talking more about the Afghan revolution, and that's something I do think is going to happen eventually, one day soon. I think we're all hoping for change. I think we need to be more bold about what it is we want and putting it out there.
Okay, so what does that question mean? Will Afghanistan get better? Will the situation change? How will that answer affect your decision moving forward? If I say it's going to get worse before it gets better, does that mean that you're going to give up on paying attention to what's happening in the country? Or does that mean that that you'll try harder to try to help in any way that you can? So sometimes, like, I think about how the question is asked and what does it mean? What's, where is it going? But I honestly think it's about perspective. Yes, maybe the country will go into civil war, maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be really a sensitive time for the next couple months. Maybe for the next 5 months, regional proxies it'll be bad, like what Soraya is saying. But at the end of the day, there's been a lot of positive things that have happened in Afghanistan during this entire. Nothing has changed except maybe the explosions are getting more frequent. People will keep moving forward. Businesses will keep popping up, and more women are in school now. More men are getting educated. There's all these things that are happening that are really positive. And society from other countries, globalization is starting. Internet technology is great. Again, it's a matter of how you are going to view the question that you're asking. I don't know. And honestly, like, I'm in Afghanistan right now trying to give back in some way that I can. And whether it gets worse or better, I'm going to try to stick it out and continue to help.
Ali, do you think that things will get better? Are you hopeful for the future? Sajid's question.
I think Sajid knows better than all of us. I think, given Lema's response, I'm kind of afraid to answer now. Do I think it'll get better? I mean, the indicators say no. So if you look at what's going on within the government, if you look at the economy, if you look at what's going on in the rest of the world and the kind of attention that's being paid to Afghanistan and sort of what's happened in the last 16 years, the answer is no. But as Lema said, I don't think that means, because at the end of the day, 99% of the people in Afghanistan don't have a choice. So whether it gets better or not, they have to stay there and they have to try and make a life for themselves. So I think for those of us that have an ability to help them or affect people who make decisions that impact their lives, it's a sad reality, but it doesn't mean, like she said, that you should stop working or trying to make something better because of it.
So things feel like they're going to get worse before they get better. I see nodding from everybody. Soraya, I know that you had some closing thoughts, and we'll end on those closing thoughts. Please, sorry, go.
With that said, I think we need to prepare ourselves when these tragedies, these attacks, these bombings happen. Unfortunately, that's just the situation in Afghanistan, and we have to prepare ourselves and not lose motivation. And what I'm seeing in the Afghan diaspora is there's a lot of momentum right now, and we need to be smart and utilize that momentum and use that to build our strength, to build a strong base, a strong foundation for ourselves. Ultimately, it's for our future.
I think the only sort of closing thought is to say that obviously, like Lima, Soraya, and I don't have all of the answers, and obviously no one does. But I think, especially if you want to get involved politically or in terms of activism and all of that, and that's great, because if Lima is correct about her estimates, it's a huge amount of people. And that is really a voting bloc that can make a difference. And that's not even counting Germany and Australia and England and all these other places. So I think the number one thing is to really sort of try and educate yourself and try and get to know about the country you come from and what's going on, and how the country you may currently be in is affecting what's going on where you're from, and how you can try and hopefully steer the direction of what they're trying to do there.
Lima, and you'll close us out.
Okay. I mean, Soraya and both Ali said, most of what needs to be said, but I think if you want to know more about what's going on in Afghanistan, reach out to people that you know who are there already, or if you don't know people there, reach out to people you heard that are there. Whether it's me, whether it's a national Afghan, whatever the case is, everyone's willing to talk to you and tell you what their perspective is, if you really want to know the varying opinions about what's happening. I think to be involved in politics at the local and national level in the diaspora is really important. Learn, copy, mimic all successful ways. Don't reinvent the wheel. I think Afghans need your help in the US, in Canada, in Germany, in wherever, France, in the UK. We need your lobbying power, honestly. And the more people come together for a united message, it's more powerful. Other than that, continue. I hope that people are still thinking about Afghanistan and they can let go of their natural biases that their parents gave them and can just really think about the situation critically rather than, painting it with broad strokes, because it's not like that. There's 10 different opinions and 10 different perspectives to look at everything that happens in Afghanistan. So yeah, those were my closing thoughts.
No, I love it. Everything that each one of you said. Educate yourself. Start the Afghan revolution, mimic best practices by other communities. These are all great things that I think people need to hear, people want to hear, because they're looking for other Afghans who are doing these things for inspiration. So thank you so much to our panelists for being here with us today. Thank you so much for joining the Some of Our Network to discuss this really important issue. You can catch us on YouTube. You can also catch us at thesomeofournetwork.com and on our Facebook page. Thank you again, and have a good day.